There's just something about tank warfare. The whole idea of it being kind of crammed in that metal box, the firepower, it makes for some pretty intense movies. And Fury, I think, really nails that feeling.
Yeah, definitely.
This movie throws us right into World War II, the final months. 1945 Germany. We're seeing the war through the eyes of this Sherman tank crew. They call their tank Fury. And they're on a mission where the odds are definitely stacked against them. We're going deeper than just the battles and the bravery today, though. We're going to see what Fury gets right, what it gets wrong about this brutal side of the war, the side we don't often hear about.
Right.
We've got your research right here. Articles, firsthand accounts. Should be fascinating. It's going to be quite the deep dive today.
Yeah.
But, okay, before we start picturing ourselves going toe-to-toe with a Tiger tank, let's set the scene a little bit.
Yeah.
So imagine you're inside this Sherman tank. The engines are roaring. You can practically smell the diesel fumes. And the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Yeah, you got to remember, the psychological pressure on these guys, these crews, it was enormous. You're talking about a metal box just big enough to hold them, and every second it could turn into a furnace with one well-placed enemy shot.
Yeah, and from what I was reading, the Sherman wasn't exactly built for comfort either, was it?
No, not even close. Don't get me wrong, the Sherman was reliable. They could pump them out like crazy.
Yeah.
But comfortable, ergonomically designed. Forget about it.
Right.
To be stuck in that thing, hours, sometimes days at a time, the noise, the heat, always wondering if this was it.
Yeah.
Psychological fatigue was a huge issue in tank warfare for a reason.
Absolutely. So when we talk about that kind of impact, what are we really talking about? What was going on in their heads?
Well, imagine this. You're inside that Sherman, a battle is raging, your senses are on overdrive, the engine's deafening, everything's shaking you can barely see.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for sensory overload.
One of the things that really got me in Fury was that feeling, that claustrophobia.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're trapped, closed in with that crew.
Yeah.
Every groan of the metal just ramps up the suspense.
The filmmakers nailed that sense of confinement, being trapped. And it's important to remember, this constant stress, it wasn't just some minor annoyance. This had a real impact.
Right.
It messed with their ability to think straight, to make decisions when it mattered most. There's some interesting research, actually.
Oh, really?
Comparing this to other situations like submarines, even astronauts. They're in these cramped, high-pressure environments for a long time with sensory deprivation.
Right.
And they end up with the whole range of psychological issues. So it makes sense, right?
So what you're saying is Fury, as intense as it wasn't that far off from the real deal.
Not at all. That claustrophobia, the tension, that wasn't Hollywood exaggerating. That was life for those crews. And we forget about that part, what they went through mentally.
It makes you really appreciate the kind of mental toughness these soldiers had, day after day, facing those conditions.
Absolutely. The pressure to perform in that kind of environment, to make split-second choices knowing your buddies' lives depend on it, remarkable. And then you bring in the tactical side of it all, going up against something like the German Tiger tank. Well, that's when it gets really interesting. And speaking of the Tiger, that scene in Fury, you know the one?
Oh, yeah.
Where they go head-to-head with that German tank. Incredible scene, visually.
Intense.
But tactically speaking, let's just say the filmmakers, they took some liberties there.
Yeah. It's like bringing, a knife to a gunfight. When I saw that, I thought, there's no way they'd actually do that. So, okay, let's say you're a Sherman crew, right? What's the play if you see a Tiger on the battlefield?
First rule. Don't go head-to-head, not if you can help it. The Tiger was built for that. Heavy armor, huge gun. The Sherman, though.
Yeah.
Their advantage was speed, maneuverability.
So less about raw power, more about strategy.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Combined arms. The Allies knew the Sherman couldn't always go toe-to-toe, so they changed the game.
You mean working with the infantry and all that?
Exactly. You want infantry nearby, protecting you from guys trying to take you out with shorter-range weapons.
Makes sense.
Plus, you've got artillery. Soften up those enemy positions, maybe even call in some air support if you can. That was the real strategy.
So it was less of a brawl, more like a chess match, even in the middle of all that chaos.
You got it. Even in the heat of battle, there was a surprising amount of strategy involved.
Wow.
But don't get me wrong, it was still terrifying. Imagine being that commander, your crew's looking to you, every decision could be their last.
Heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes us to the human cost, something Fury definitely doesn't shy away from. The bond between those crew members. You really feel how much they depend on each other.
Right.
It reminded me of something I read at Tank Commander. He said something like, you're not just fighting for your country, you're fighting for the guy next to you. You're fighting to make sure he sees another day. Powerful.
Absolutely. That camaraderie, it was everything. It wasn't just about keeping spirits up. It was about survival, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Stuck together, facing death day after day, forges a bond like no other.
And that brings us to Wardaddy.
Hmm.
Brad Pitt's character. He's seen it all, done it all, but even he relies on his crew, treats them like family almost. They base him on a real guy, right?
Yeah.
Lafayette Poole.
That's the one. Poole was a legend, one of the most successful American tank commanders in the entire war. Now look, Fury gets a lot right, the grit, the determination. Men like Poole, they had that in spades. But Hollywood's Hollywood. They take liberties, like the setting, 1945.
Yeah.
Poole was actually already recovering from a pretty bad injury by then, wounded earlier in the war.
So even with these legends, these real heroes like Poole, it seems like Fury plays the timeline a bit, right? Blends fact and fiction.
Yeah, you could see that.
And speaking of fiction, there's this feeling you get watching the movie, almost like the Americans are hanging on by a thread at this point in the war, like it's a real uphill battle.
Right, right.
Did it feel that way in real life, though?
Yeah.
By 1945, things were different for Germany, weren't they?
Yeah, 45. Germany was, to put it bluntly, a spent force by then. Years of fighting, they were running out of men, out of resources. Plus, you've got the Allied air power.
Oh, right.
Constant bombing. Not a pretty picture if you're on the German side.
So maybe not as desperate for the Allies as the film makes it seem.
Exactly. Now, don't get me wrong. Individual units, like we see in Fury, they faced tough fights, suffered losses. But the big picture, it was clear who was going to win.
It's interesting, though. Fury uses that underdog story, even if the reality was a little different.
That's the power of a good story, right?
Yeah.
We love to see courage, resilience, facing those impossible odds.
Definitely.
And look, even if Fury plays a little loose with the history, it reminds us what those soldiers went through. In the tanks, on the ground, the sacrifices they made.
Makes you think. What if they remade Fury today? No Hollywood, just the straight facts. Would it hit the same way?
Good question.
If it showed how it really was? Germany on his last legs? Would it have the same impact? Or do movies need that extra drama, to keep us on the edge of our seats?
It's a tough one, finding that balance. Keeping it real, but making it a story that grabs you.
It is. And I guess that's something for all of us to keep in mind, right?
Yeah.
When we're watching these war films, enjoying the thrill, the explosions, those intense battles,
Yeah.
how much is for entertainment and how much reflects what those soldiers truly endured?
Important to remember.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been eye-opening. And for everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep learning. We'll see you next time.